I still have yet to ask Caleb if that's the right intro we should use, but I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, we'll keep doing it until Caleb explicitly corrects us. And
This
then we'll
seems like
probably keep doing it a little bit more, but whatever.
you're assuming Caleb ever listens to these. Anyways, welcome back. I was checking, I think our shortest turnaround on a book club in ever, possibly.
Which is a huge indictment on us, if you really think about it.
Yeah, so to catch everybody up, we are still doing Jacques Maritain's magnum opus, The Degrees of Knowledge.
Indeed.
We have, in the last episode, we just finished the first part, which was the degrees of natural knowledge, if I'm not mistaken. I want to make sure I'm not misquoting.
You can check first part, the degrees of rational knowledge, philosophy, and experimental science.
Yes. And so today we are starting the second part, which is the degrees of supra-rational knowledge. To briefly sort of go over what he has covered so far. In the first part, he goes into the scholastic theory of epistemology, which is how we know things, which he calls critical realism, and then goes in detail into each of our rational degrees of knowledge, starting with sensible knowledge, and then finishing that section on metaphysical knowledge, knowledge of being as being. So with that, he sort of concludes what we know by reason alone, and is going to start this section, the second part, talking about suprarational knowledge. So knowledge through revelation or by faith or these sorts of things. So we're going to do, I think, about the first half of chapter 6.
Yeah, roughly half.
With any luck, we will do the second half of chapter 6. I'm gonna be super ambitious and say sometime during July. This will probably come out beginning of July. We'll try and do another one in July.
We can do
otherwise
end of July. I'm traveling like July 4th, but I'll bring the book so I can at least finish this part with me.
There we go. Otherwise, it'll be 6 months again, and we'll finish the chapter sometime after we've each read it 3 times in December or something like that. But is what it is. Okay, so this is chapter 6, mystical experience and philosophy. As he has done in several points, he dedicates individual chapters. This is to Reverend Father. I'm not going to. Can you manage the pronunciation?
Lagrange.
Garrigou. Okay, Garrigou Lagrange.
I think that's what it is. Lagrange, I'm pretty sure.
Lagrange, I'm confident on.
Yeah, because I've heard the mathematician's name like 1,000 times. But aside from that, Garrigou is really what's throwing me off here. But I think that's it.
Okay, so to start with that, what did you think of the first half of this chapter?
I really liked it. First, he starts out with a little recap of the end of the last chapter when he talks about natural theology, which was helpful since it's been a while. And then he goes on to moving to first theology proper. Then he starts talking about the most interesting part of the chapter, which is mystical theology, which is essentially the reception of grace. It's a passive reception of grace and knowledge through connaturality. Be very careful when I pronounce that word. And then he, after establishing these 3 different types of wisdoms, he starts talking about the operation of grace and the conditions for receiving it, or the conditions to be ready to receive it, because one can receive grace and not act on it. He has a very apt metaphor where he says that one has to have their sails ready for the wind of grace, which is a pretty good way of putting it without because sometimes when writers talk about grace, it seems like God is limited by the human. It seems like God is limited by what the human is at the moment. So so it sounds like God could not, through grace, transform a vicious human being. Whereas what we're really saying is that God will give you grace. It's your choice whether to accept it or not, and you tend to accept it if you're ready for it. Although sometimes we'll see cases where he does radically transform someone. The case of Saul, for example, maybe. St. Paul, I should say, since is today his feast day, his and solemnity of St. Peter, St. Paul?
I believe that is correct, yes.
Yeah, because we celebrate, because I usually go to Mass Saturday night, so we celebrated Mass. I didn't know if it was like today or tomorrow, or if it was yesterday or something.
Yeah, so we're recording this on the 29th. I think it is today.
Okay, good. Right on the day then. Perfect. There's plenty of citations of Romans and Corinthians in the chapter so far.
I think appropriately. So a lot of times in the first part of the book, I think certainly there were still plenty of citations to Thomas Aquinas and other relevant scholastics, but a lot of also philosophers that were his contemporaries or philosophy in
Oh
general.
yes. He
And
talks a
this
lot
one,
about Descartes, Heidegger, Husserl, especially in the first half of the first part.
right? But here I'm seeing there's a lot more scripture being quoted, which I think is appropriate when you start
Hmm.
talking about mystical knowledge. Especially because I
Yeah.
think so
Hmm.
many of the epistles are so often the epistles. There's this, um, I don't think as fully developed as the scholastics make it, but there is there are a lot of the same ideas about how we understand faith and how we understand mystical knowledge are presented in such a beautiful way in the epistles. So,
Oh yeah. I mean, the most cited, I guess, the most cited book by Saint Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologiae is, of course, the Bible, and then Saint Augustine, and then a relatively distant third, if I remember correctly. I think someone tracked the number of citations. Is Aristotle,
mhm,
despite the fame of Saint Thomas as I guess, a neo-Aristotelian of his time
right.
in a certain way. So, what did you think of the chapter? I know you've read the entire chapter, but what did you think of the first half, I suppose, at least?
Yeah, so I think this is probably the easiest read for me so far. So I think it's still very dense, and you still have to take your time. Um, it is getting so much more. I don't know. I find myself getting a lot more emotional reading this chapter in a good way. Like it is
Hmm.
because you were starting to talk now about um, what he calls mystical experience, and we'll get into what that means. Is this sort of this real, I don't want to say encounter seems too blasé, but this interaction or this indwelling of the Trinity in you
Yes.
and the beatific vision. And yeah, I think it's very much still in an academic and an intellectual mode, but it just engages so much the beauty of the Catholic faith and what what paradise is in a sense. And I
Yeah,
found it
he
very moving, and it
refers.
was very easy to keep reading.
Mhm. He refers very beautifully to heaven or the beatific vision as the fatherland at two different points in
Hmm.
the first half with capital F, which I found very moving. And it's also more moving in the sense because he's talking about essentially the experience or the, I don't know, maybe the lived experience, which has been a term kind of appropriated recently by the unworthies of it. But the I don't. Yeah, lived experience kind of is the best term that at least I can use right now. Maybe you have a better one, but the lived experience of grace and its necessity for knowledge, for supra rational knowledge of God, where you kind of, it's not just this intellectual mode of abstraction and rationalization and intellection. You kind of have to live it, and that's a requirement.
Hmm.
He gets into this later, but even for the intellectual, for theology proper, not even mystical theology, it is still a requirement. And we'll get into this later. It's my favorite quote of a chapter.
You're not suggesting that we're not saved by faith alone, are you?
Well, actually I was going to make a joke on that because of a diagram. If you
Fine.
remember, there's a part where it
Oh
says
God, yeah, you're right.
faith and then alone. I was going to make a Mahatanda turning to fide sola or sola fide. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry to rob. Hopefully it'll still feel fresh when we get to it. The other thing that I enjoyed is so in the previous chapter, I think towards the end of the chapter, he starts talking about uh, sort of the way of knowing and the way of non-knowing, this apophatic philosophy. So
Hmm.
sort of knowing through negation or theology or metaphysics through negation. And I thought that tied really beautifully into this because a lot of this goes into okay, what like there's and even in chapter one of this book, which chapter one was on the majesty and poverty of metaphysics,
Yes.
where he just gives this beautiful uh, discussion of all the incredible things that metaphysics can do, and that ultimately metaphysics is going to fall short of its goal. Like
Hmm.
metaphysics is always striving towards being himself, and metaphysics is always going to fall short of knowing being himself as being himself. And that what you need to go beyond that, what metaphysics, and he goes into this in a lot of detail in the second half of the chapter. I don't want to get in too much into that, but that metaphysics, in a way, and I'm going to be imprecise with my language here, but kind of calls for some kind of mystical knowledge or revelation to
Yes.
or it without that, it can't, you cannot achieve the ends of metaphysics. Metaphysics is not able to satisfy itself.
Yeah.
um and so it needs, we lead very naturally into all these things that are, again, are going to be super rational, as we were going to be discussing things, everything previously. um there are people, or philosophers will disagree, but there is a reason will tell you whether what he says is true or not. Right. And now we're going to move very much, and still, using a lot of rigorous discussion and rigorous metaphysics to verify what he says. But now the foundations are going to be revelation, and the church, whereas previously they were our senses and our intellect.
Yes, the reaching of man beyond himself and his inability to do so is appropriately a big part of Mahaytan's anthropology, his understanding of man, because it's kind of a big part of of a Catholic view of man. But he really stresses it a lot more than other Christian or Catholic writers I've seen. It's a big part of his understanding of both man's intellect and man's appetites at pretty much every point when he's talking about man qua man, his anthropology.
All right, so I think that's probably enough for introduction. Do we want to get into the first part, the first paragraph, first part? So the first section of this chapter is what's called the three wisdoms. Do you want to start on any comments you have on point one or paragraph one?
Yeah, I was going to read the first paragraph and then move on to what I call the little recap, which is paragraphs, essentially point two, the first paragraph and the second paragraph of point two is a little recap, and just above point three. So I can read that, and then we can just discuss it, see if there's anything missing from it, from the recap, if we feel like it. All right. So point one, from the three wisdoms. Let it be agreed once and for all that, in the present instance, we understand the word mystical experience not in a more or less vague sense, covering all sorts of more or less mysterious or preternatural facts, or even simple religious feeling, but rather in the sense of an experimental knowledge of the deep things of God, or a suffering of divine things, an experience which leads the soul through a series of states and transformations, until within the very depths of itself it feels the touch of divinity and experiences the life of God. So that's what he means by mystical experience, is the experience of the life of God in the depth of the soul. So do you feel I should read the second paragraph of point one, or can we?
No, I think that's okay. I would just, I'll re-stress, because I've in other things you'll certainly hear this idea of mysticism, and sometimes it is mysticism can be seen in a derogatory sense, and certainly there's a lot of, because you get this idea of
you get new agey type stuff. That's what people think when you say mysticism, and that is not what mysticism has been for like 1900 years.
Yes, exactly. And he wants to make very clear that is not what he's talking about is weird. And later on, he will also talk about these sort of either fake mystical experiences or things that like experience people had that they thought were mystical and probably weren't, or these sorts of things.
Yeah, he foreshadows that, where he says we're going to discuss if mystical experience is possible naturally,
right,
without divine intervention from a Trinity, essentially.
But this is, like you said, this is when he means what he says. What he means by mysticism is this very particular supernatural, in the literal sense of the word, experience of the life of God. It is this. He uses the word experimental knowledge. I think I would, experiential is probably what I would say, because he has a footnote where they have issues with the word experience, because we never really experience God in this life, because we
yes, of course. He stresses that at several points. where it's a work that is to be continuous and only completed in the fatherland. I think is a later quote in this chapter.
Yes. So there's all these sorts of little caveats, but that it is reflective of that kind of direct encounter with being himself.
Hmm.
Far beyond any kind of new agey feeling of, ooh, this feels spiritual. This is a yeah, it's
Yeah,
something
very
beyond.
much so. Important to keep that in mind and to sort of separate c- proper mysticism from improper or fake mysticism.
Yes.
So, point two, it is fitting, and this is a fundamental point, to distinguish three wisdoms properly so called. Wisdom being defined as a supreme knowledge, having a universal object and judging things by first principles. The first and least elevated of these wisdoms is metaphysical wisdom, the supreme science in the purely rational or natural order. So, just to re-stress this, so the supreme science of the natural order is the least elevated of the three wisdoms he'll be talking about. Rising above the visible things, whose ultimate reason it seeks, he's talking about metaphysics, it recognizes by reason the existence of God, the first cause and author of nature. Starting with creatures, and then he puts Greek in there, I don't know what it means, and rising by way of causality to the first principle of all being, God can indeed be known. Reason can indeed know God. So too can it know his existence and perfections, his unity, simplicity, his real and absolute distinctness from the world. The knowledge of God, which is thus achieved by reason, constitutes first philosophy, metaphysics, or natural theology, as Aristotle called it. It is an ananoetic knowledge, I hope you listened to the last chapter, or knowledge by analogy, which is by no means to be confused with metaphorical knowledge. To know God, it uses notions which we seek for in things, and which we therefore conceive in their limited mode, according as they are realized in created things, but which in themselves, in what they signify, imply no limitation or imperfection, and can therefore belong intrinsically and in their proper sense to the uncreated as well as to the created, a knowledge refracted in the prism of creatures, yet veracious for all that. And then skipping a paragraph just to end point two, metaphysics cannot attain the divine essence in itself. And yet it truly knows God in the divided mirror of transcendental perfections analogically common to the uncreated and to the created. In the mirror, it grasps in the imperfect mode proper to finite things, realities which, brought to their pure state and overflowing all our concepts, pre exist in the incomprehensible simplicity of the infinite. This was pretty much a very beautiful recap of like 70% of the last chapter, to be honest. Like something like that.
Right. And to summarize again, and I think this is something that I've stressed over and over again, which should be common knowledge to Catholics, and honestly to all learned men. But this idea that reason can indeed know God, that through reason we can know of God's existence and we can know something of Him through this ananoetic knowledge or knowledge by analogy. And as a reminder, what that is we see something of the transcendentals in this world. Is like I can see goodness in something or in someone, and I can understand in some way what goodness is, and I can see that in the where I view goodness or justice or truth or unity or any of the transcendentals, um, that it is somehow constrained. And by analogy, I can understand the unconstrained goodness that is that is the good, that is the uncreated
Hmm.
creator.
And one should be reminded that this has been pronounced. I think I don't know if it's technically dogma. I would need to check, but it has been pronounced to be true in the First Vatican Council that man can know God by reason.
Yes. If to claim otherwise, you are if you claim otherwise, you are anathema.
Yeah, you're anathema. It was actually a very funny coincidence that I found that out, and I was reading something by Anscombe, which commented on the minimum case for that to be true, and she, because she lived in base, I believe she worked in Oxford, the most atheistic university at the time in all of England, and she thought all of them were terrible, philosophers and ethicists. But she commented on the minimum case for her peers to agree with her, that a Jew who had some reason to believe in Old Testament prophecies, if he read the book of Isaiah and then read the New Testament, he, by reason of that alone, he has reason to believe in the prophecies, just by virtue of being Jewish in some sense, reads the book of Isaiah and then reads the New Testament, he has reason to believe in a fulfillment of a prophecy. And it's really funny to me that we know someone to whom that literally happened, which is Jay, by the way. If I remember, it was him reading the book of Isaiah that made him a Catholic, and that will always be very interesting to me. But I know the exact case that Anscombe is discussing. Just a funny little coincidence that came to mind as I was reading this chapter.
That is what I did not realize that.
Yeah, it's great. All right, any comment before I move on to point 3 and I guess 4?
Yeah, so to reiterate again, he's going to talk about these three wisdoms. The first of which being metaphysics, which is um, the pinnacle of our rational knowledge, right? Growing up, and again, this is the work of the whole first part of the book. Growing up from our sense knowledge into our intellect and our ideas of um, physica and mathematica and all the other abstractions, up to metaphysics, and what we can show by metaphysics again, and what metaphysics alone can do is astounding, and it is still going to be the least of these three wisdoms that we have. So please go ahead.
Yes. The next wisdom, just to give a little introduction to it, points 3, 4, and I guess most of 5. Yeah, and all of 5 until like point 6. He's going to talk about theology proper. He's going to describe what it is and then its mode of operation in the intellect. So, point 3. Above this wisdom of a natural order, metaphysics or natural theology, stands the science of revealed mysteries, which is the very good title for it, the science of revealed mysteries. This is theology properly so called. I'm just going to refer to it as theology proper to distinguish it from natural theology. It develops in a rational manner and according to the discursive mode that is natural to us. And it develops in a rational manner and according to the discursive mode that is natural to us, truths virtually contained in the deposit of revelation. Inasmuch as it proceeds according to the method and sequences of reason, but is rooted in faith, from which it gets its principles, themselves borrowed from God's knowledge. Its proper light is not the light of reason all by itself, but the light of reason illumined by faith. For that reason, its certitude is, of itself, superior to the certitude of metaphysics. Very important here. The certitude of theology proper is superior to the certitude of metaphysics. It is not merely more elevated in its subject matter and what it can know, it is more certain. It does not have it as its object God as expressed by his creatures, nor God as the first cause or author of the natural order, but rather God in the guise of mystery, as inaccessible to reason alone, in his own essence and inner life. Theology is not concerned with God in those things that reason discovers within him, as analogically common with other beings. Rather, it studies God in those things that he has absolutely proper to himself, in what belongs to him alone. Datas ut sic, as the theologians say. This is the God who will be known face to face in the beatific vision. So, quick summary of these two paragraphs. Natural theology has God as first cause, or God as author of a natural order, as its object, whereas theology proper has God's own essence and inner life as its natural object of contemplation. So, any comments before I go on to point 4?
No, I will wait, I think. Go ahead.
All right. Deity as such, which is above being and every conceivable perfection. God considered in his proper essence and inner life. Sub ratione su proprie quiditatis. He's quoting here Cajetan. Let us say, in his inwardness, God's selfhood. These various terms, let us note, indicate an object common to the vision of the blessed, by which I assume he means the saints. I'm not sure he means those who are blessed in their mortal life yet.
Yeah, he's referring. I'm confident he's referring to those who
Yeah,
have
because
the
of what he
beatific
says
vision.
later in the chapters. That indicate a object common to the vision of the blessed, to the theological virtue of faith, and to theology. But these free knowledges attain the same object in free ways under free formally different intelligibilities. The beatific vision shows him by and in his very essence. Sicut in se est, in the est. I can't translate the Latin. I can understand it sometimes, but to put it in English is to almost repeat what he's saying before, so I'm not going to bother.
Right.
According to what he is in himself, in a way proportionate to what he is, without the mediation of any creature or concept. This is sire de Deo quid est, knowing his essence in itself. Then, says St. Paul, I shall know even as I am known. And St. John, we shall see him as he is. Although I'm not sure St. John then repeated that in Latin and Greek, but whatever. I'll forgive Bagaton for putting that in quotations. In the vision, the divine selfhood will be grasped just as it is. And then the next 3 paragraphs I'm going to read, and then I'll skip to point 5. So he's now going to talk about faith, the role of faith in this, I suppose. Faith is a substitute for vision here below and a beginning of eternal life. Knows this self-same object without seeing it, giving as it does even in obscurity an infallible adherence to what first truth has revealed of itself. It is an essentially supernatural virtue, and it is suprarational because its formal motive, veritas prima revelans, or revelation of the first truth, is essentially supernatural. Thus, it knows the very same God. Thus, it knows the very same thing that God and the blessed see in God in a very imperfect way. But the only way in which the revealed treasure can be communicated to the human race. In clinging to the testimony of first truth, it attains God's inner depths, his very selfhood, without seeing it. That is the object at which it terminates, the thing at which it stops, that in which it is fixed by revelation. But this communication is made to it in the signs of language and human concepts. And how could we understand him otherwise? God speaks our language so as to be understood by us. These means of transmitting the divine truths, these conceptual statements whereby uncreated light comes to us, and which the Church, Christ's mystical body, which tends our belief through its head, assisted by the Spirit of God, tailors with rigid precision, are the intermediaries through which faith passes, the medium faith uses to attain the deity. These are, as St. John of the Cross says, its silvered exteriors, by means of which the mind clings to the pure gold of divine reality. Let us say that such is its object. Let us say that such is its object, no longer taken from the point of view of the thing believed itself, but rather from the point of view of the signs or means used by the believing mind. So that paragraph may have been confusing in its construction, but he's essentially saying that faith still uses concepts in the world here below. Theology proper assisted by faith in Revelation will still use languages, and he uses an analogy by St. John of the Cross that these are the silvered exteriors by which the mind uses to grasp the gold of the divine reality. But it's not touching the divine reality quite yet because it has not attained the beatific vision, and it's still in concepts and words of human knowledge, whereas as we will see later, mystical theology sort of doesn't abandon that, but makes it redundant in a way. So next paragraph, and then I'll go to point 5. As we see, knowledge by analogy returns here once more in a certain way, to the extent, namely, that revelation uses human signs. It does not return as something determining the first formality under which God is constituted as object or thing known, for he is attained in virtue of his very selfhood, in virtue of what properly constitutes him, and not, as in the case of metaphysics, as a result of his analogy with things. But it does come back once more in the signs and means which place such an object within our grasp. To express the mystery of the Trinity, notions of Father, Son, Spirit, generation, procession, nature, person must be used. They are first supplied by creatures, and by God himself, who makes himself known through the Son within his bosom, and for the Church, which keeps and expounds the words of the Son. God joins these together in the dogmatic pronouncements of the Church, analogical concepts which the proper light of faith, lumen infusum fidei, something more formal than they, something more secretly and vitally supernatural, uses to attain God's inwardness. And that's the last I'm quoting of point 4 before I go on to point 5.
So I will back us up a step for a second and sort of make
Please.
sure everyone's following along. So again,
Mhm.
the first thing he discusses before, or the first point here, is this idea of the beatific vision. And so for those that aren't super familiar, this is the direct experience of God that the saints have, that those in heaven have, that they are.
You can use it as a synonym for heaven almost. If you say someone
Yes.
is experiencing the beatific vision, they're either dead or they're having a big moment. They are confirmed a saint, with one of the miracles of St. Thomas is that he saw the beatific vision before his death, for example.
Right, but for except for those miraculous occurrences, it is the encounter with God in heaven. It is that is the,
Yes.
so when he talks
It
about,
is the face to face with God, which I think Maritain
yes,
uses the face to face.
yes, um, and he gives part of the quote from First Corinthians, but I think I'm going to read the full uh, verse because I think it's nice. So this is First Corinthians chapter 13 verse 12, where he says, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as I am known." And he gives the second part of that. Um, but and again, like as I mentioned um, earlier, the St. Paul does such a good job introducing these very deep ideas. Like this is the idea of the beatific vision: is you will know God face to face, as you will, as Meriton says, you will know His essence in itself. You will know Him by and in His essence. And then what we have here below is, because we are not experiencing the beatific vision, because we are not experiencing God in his essence, is we have faith. Um, the object of which is God in his essence. So the thing known through faith is the same thing known in the beatific vision. Again, when we do metaphysics, the God that we know is this metaphysical God. It is the uncaused cause.
Yeah,
It
it's the
is
same
the
object, but it's a different sense, to use Frege's
yes.
terminology. It's the same referent. We're referring to the same object, but we're referring to God as first cause, as as prime mover in this Aristotelian detached way. We're not referring to him as Father. We're not referring to him as the God to whom we pray.
And we're not referring to him as God as he is in himself. Again, like
Yes, in
Meriton
his
says, is
very
we're
inwardness and divine life. No.
is through metaphysics we only know him through his creation, right? He is the first cause of creation. We can, like, he is the prime mover. It is this analogy that we have to the things created allow us to understand in this metaphysical way what God is. In the beatific vision, you will know God as he is in himself. And through faith, we know God as he is through himself but we don't know it with the same clarity. We don't know it with the same, again, we know it through a glass darkly. It is obscured. It is this more pure or essential knowledge of God, but it is obscured. It is mysterious, because again,
Yes,
it is,
instead of, you're now clinging to silvered exteriors instead of clinging to your reason alone. But you're not to the gold of a divine essence itself, to use St. John of the Cross's analogy once again as a crutch here.
yes. Yeah,
All
I
right.
think that's the main point that I wanted to make. So please continue.
All right, point 5. And then I'm going to have to share my screen because we have
We have more
Jacques
diagrams.
graphic.
Yes.
Yeah, Jacques graphic design is my passion. Mahitan returns strikes once again. Terror into our hearts. Now, I'm excited for this one. Now, this God of faith, deity as such, not seen, but believed, or attained to in the testimony of first truth, and by means of dogmatic definitions, is also the object of theology. Theology, and by this he means theology proper, not natural theology or metaphysics. Theology proper envisages it from the point of view of virtual revelation, as it is called. In other words, from a point of view of the consequences that reason, when enlightened by faith, can draw from formally revealed principles. This is not the place to go into any lengthy developments concerning the nature of theological wisdom. All that needs to be noted is that theology is quite a different thing from a simple application of philosophy to matters of revelation. That would be truly a monstrous conception. It would submit revealed data to a purely human light and subordinate theological wisdom to philosophy. This is probably one of my favorite rants in the entire book so far. There exists no genuine science or wisdom unless within the soul there be a genuine intellectual virtue, proportioning the light of discrimination and judgment to the proper level of the object, to an object which is the depths of revealed divinity, insofar as it can be exploited by reason. There must necessarily correspond as its light in the soul, not the light of philosophy, but a proportionate light, the light of supernatural faith, taking up and directing the natural movement of reason and its natural way of knowing. Thus, theology is not a simple application of natural reason and of philosophy to revealed data. It is an elucidation of revealed data by faith, vitally linked with reason, advancing in step with reason, and arming itself with philosophy. That is why philosophy, far from subordinating theology to itself, is properly the servant or the handmaiden of theology in the immanent use theology makes of it. Theology is free as regards philosophical doctrines. It is theology that chooses among these doctrines the one that will in its hand be the best instrument of truth. And this is my favorite quote so far: let a theologian lose theological faith, he can still keep the whole machinery and conceptual organization of his science, but he keeps it as something dead in his mind. He has lost his proper light. He is no longer a theologian except in the way that a corpse is a man. To sum up, deity itself as seen or known quiddatively or essentially in its essence is the object of the knowledge of the blessed. Deity itself as believed and formally revealed is the object of faith. Deity itself as believed and virtually revealed is the object of theology. That's all of point 5, which means first we comment on it and then we interpret the chicken scratches that Maui came up with. So
The
I have
diagrams are always informative, I promise.
yeah, they're always a treat. I will say that, but I won't comment on their on their helpfulness.
So with this and something from the previous section, I'm trying to find the exact quote there earlier.
point 4, you mean? Or
It was in point 4. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, but I'm reminded by this idea. I can't remember who said it, but they were talking about I think it was even Aristotle's physics, and then Aquinas' commentary on Aristotle's physics. And the quote goes something along the lines of reading Aristotle's physics is like walking through this vast, incredible, beautiful city in the middle of the night with a holding a lantern, right? So you can see there's this incredible, immense beauty, just sort of that you can get a sense of, and you realize there, but you really can't quite comprehend it. And then reading Aristotle or Aquinas' commentary on it is walking through that same city at midday.
that makes okay, interesting.
And I'm just reminded by that in this idea that again, in Aristotle, I say, like, as in Aquinas' words, as the philosopher is sort of this pinnacle of natural reason, and then it is the proper end of this reason in these bigger things are that it is that pure reason is elevated by revelation and by faith, right? Because again, he talks, Maritain talks about the dealing with being himself, when the object of our thought is supra rational. It's ridiculous to try and confine it to the rational, right? With the we have to be proportion. He says proportion the light of discrimination to the proper level of the object. So to consider things divine, you have to proportion your thinking to the divine. And again, the divine is supra rational, right? There's only so much we can know of God at the rational level. And so reason must become the servant of theology, of theology proper, and of faith, to be elevated to the point of contemplation of the divine as it is capable of. So we don't abandon reason, but reason becomes the servant of theology, because the object of our consideration is beyond reason.
Yes, this is also one important quote here, I think, is it is theology that chooses among these doctrines, these philosophical doctrines, the one that will in its hand be the best instrument of truth. It's why in the 19th century, and I think earlier too, but 19th century might be the most marked example of it, Catholic universities would normally have like a Thomistic chair, a Franciscan chair, because it's not like one doctor. They have like two major ones at least.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be a Franciscan chair, a Thomistic chair, and sometimes there'd even be a nominalist chair for the Achabites in residence. But because there's essentially different schools of philosophy competing to try and help and be a handmaiden to faith. It's not that reason then chooses what of faith is acceptable. That be like I believe it's called the Jefferson Bible, where he cuts out all the miracles out of the Bible.
Right.
You as an American probably know more of this than me, but you get the sort of dried out dead husk at the end. You get nothing. You get death.
Yeah. And there is some very clear sense that you're doing things backwards.
Yeah, you're very much. Yeah, you're not. Yeah, it's a weird way to put it, but because if for us moderns or people who are trained in modern philosophy, it seems like it should be the other way around. It's like, no, I'm gonna do, I'm gonna be I'm gonna be like Aristotle. I'm going to get to theism, and then through what I've gotten to theism, I'll then interpret from what to choose. And you'll probably, if you do that, you'll just stay a theist the rest of your life. If you don't have like a lived experience of a faith, you'll just remain that for the rest of your life. You won't get to anything deeper. To get to something deeper, you need faith, and you need the lived experience of faith and an intellectual virtue, which is also really important. He mentions that there exists no genuine science or wisdom unless within the soul there be a genuine intellectual virtue. And then he talks about the proportioning of light, of discrimination, of faith. But that's a really important point there, that there can be like a Platonic Christian, or a Christian who like emphasizes like with Neoplatonism as the proper interpretation of theology. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, for example, would not be a Thomist. Very very famous. He was way before Saint Thomas. I believe Palamas is technically a saint in the Roman Catholic calendar because of churches that we accepted. So I'll say Saint Palamas would not be a Thomist, and if he is correct, and if he can be genuinely considered a saint, Palamism can be a way to interpret faith. But it is faith that chooses a theology or the philosophy that can best interpret it. So this is why I don't see a problem with people who don't understand, for example, St. Thomas's account of transubstantiation. But if for some reason you understand Blessed Duns Scotus' account of it, or I think Bonaventure at least has some comments on how the bread becomes the real flesh and blood, although I'm not sure he assigns to it a name such as transubstantiation, or if you understand St. Bonaventure's explanation of it, there's no reason to say, well, I'm going to go with their philosophical explanation for it, because that's that's the way that I can comprehend it. Because as long as you're adhering to this through faith, you're just really searching for the right concepts to understand things. As long as you don't go too far. I think the nominalists go a little too far, but I'm obviously biased here.
Certainly. And one possibly trivial point I want to make, but I think it's worth mentioning.
Go ahead.
Is you had said, you could be like Aristotle and just be a theist, but you would probably just remain a theist. To go beyond that, you need faith. The other thing to add is to go beyond theism, you need the incarnation, right? And
Oh,
this will
yes.
get more into our discussion of grace, but there's a reason that we don't condemn Aristotle, is he was pre-incarnation, is he did what he could do with what he was given, and he did not live during or after the incarnation, and therefore there was nothing to have faith, or there were not things to have faith in. There is this very real, and again very very important for Christians, that there was this moment where God reached out to man and gave man something to have faith in, right? It's because reason can't take us far enough. God had to give us something to elevate our reason, and he gave us his son. Like as Maritain says, I won't read the whole quote. Yeah, I won't be back to it. but this is an essential part of where the faith comes from. Is the reason we have faith in Revelation is because there is a New Testament. There are the Gospels, and from that, the founding of the church that can have the deposit of faith. But this is very much a receptive mode of man and of the church. This is not something that we attained on our own. It's something that was given to us.
Yeah, the Gospels together with the epistles and the Old Testament, of course, too. But these are essentially the formally revealed principles. If you want to see how much you can get out of it, the most succinct summary you will get of everything you can get out of it is the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it's like 2,000 pages long, or some ridiculous. I need my catechism is in the other room, so I'm not going to go and get it, but it's ridiculously big, and that's them trying to be succinct to be accessible to all Catholics. Available to you in audio form by courtesy of Father Mike Schmitz, by the way. But you can get a lot out of that. And actually, one of our favorite moments of doing this podcast was Gold Guy had just converted, and he was coming up. We were discussing Rand, I think, but he was starting to read a Gospel of Matthew, and he's like discussing all of these questions. And one of them was like, well, what would happen if God killed God? And I just told him, man, you're gonna really like the end of that, of the Gospel of Matthew.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah, that was easily my favorite moment, because it was just such an easy setup by Gold Guy, and he was saying it so it really felt like I was spoiling it because he had no idea.
How's it gonna end? Yep.
Yeah, well, now you know. It's better to know and read it with that knowledge in some ways. So shall I share my screen? We're
Please.
probably not going to even get to the half of it, because we're going to spend the next 40 minutes on this guy on this godforsaken diagram.
Lord.
Where is window? Yeah, that notebook. Yeah, you can see things now, hopefully.
And I can add it. How's that look? Yeah, I think that works.
Okay. Yeah, you told me because once I share screen, it immediately goes to the
Gotcha.
screen I'm sharing.
Yep, we can
All
see it.
right. All right, I'll just do a slight zoom in. So where do we start here? First,
You're gonna have to explain this to me because again, I've given up on even. I will read the words in the diagrams and then move past them. So
yeah,
you're
I
gonna have to
think
explain
you
it to me.
mostly have to read it horizontally because reading it vertically makes no sense. Or else you get the beatific vision is aided by faith and reason in different. It's like very weird. It's like that's clearly counterproductive to everything he said so far. So you kind of have to read it horizontally. So we get the beatific vision, move to the right, seen through his essence, and then we'll get to the larger point
Oh wait,
here.
no. So I think I get it. It's actually moving right to left. So
Yeah, you can do that, I suppose. Yeah, that's
yeah.
probably
Okay.
easier because it starts with the bigger ones. But it can move
Yeah.
right to left, left to right, I think.
Okay, but I think so. Yeah. So we have God as He is in His own life, and then at the top we have that God as He is in His own life, seen through His essence,
And that's the beatific
and then
vision.
that is the beatific vision. Yeah.
Yes, we got that. But then we
Okay.
have below the beatific vision, which he demarcates of two little lines, attested by the first truth. So you start with the principles of the first truth, which would be revelation. And then you have three ways to do that. Experienced, so you experience those first truths. This would be an experience of grace, for example. And then you have formal revelation, which would maybe be dogmas of a church. And then I guess formal revelation might just be the Bible itself. And then virtually revealed, which would be through the aid of reason. So elucidations of already gone revelation. Not revelation itself, but elucidations of what is contained within the revelation. And then you move left again, you get to the domain of faith. And then you move to the top of faith. You have faith and gifts of the Holy Spirit, which is mystical wisdom. This would translate to the experience of the first truth. Then you have faith alone, which make the sola fide joke. Mahiton comes out as a fucking Pentecostal or whatever. Faith alone is the formal revelation of the first truth. You just believe the Bible. And then faith and reason, theological wisdom, theology proper, is the virtual revelation. And then I guess we go below that. We have God, go to the right again. God as first cause. So this is we're not analyzing God or contemplating, I should say. Analyzing sounds a little too objectifying to God. We're contemplating God as first cause, and then shown by his effects, because that's the only way we could possibly know God as first cause. We're not angels. And even then, angels would technically know God as an effect because they know him as they as creator of themselves in a way. So shown by his effects, and then reason or metaphysical wisdom is how we get to reasons. Reason interacts with the effects of God, which is the created order of the creatures, and from that you get to God. Basically, this is the trajectory of Aristotle. If you go from left to right, he reasons, he looks at the world, he sees that they're the effect of God, he concludes God is real. I'm concluding, I forget which chapter of the metaphysics here for you, and like chapter 10 of the Physica or something like that too.
I'm a little shocked. I think I understand this diagram. Like there's nothing in it that confuses. Like I think it might. I don't know if it's
might even be
clarifying or
helpful.
not. It might be,
It
which would
might be
be a
helpful
first.
as a summary, in a way. I don't know if it clarifies, but it summarizes fairly well. My trouble with it before this was I was reading it vertically. It was only when I was like 30 minutes before we started that I started I was rereading and taking notes and underlining stuff. And then I was like, oh no, the way I was doing doesn't make sense, obviously. You need to redo it horizontal. The right to left is a good little trick. I think that's an easier way of understanding it because you're starting with God, because that would be not the logical order because we start with ourselves, but the proper metaphysical order of things. All right, should I? We actually did it. I'm kind of impressed.
I'm
We're not.
impressed. I'm impressed by us. I'm impressed by Marathon. I think he's getting better at this. I think by chapter 8 or 9, these might actually be not only good summaries, but they might actually be like helpful.
You think he got better at them as the book went along?
I mean, maybe.
I mean, yeah. How long did he take to write this? Did he do this in less time than we've been reading it? Because if
I
he
don't.
did it in more or less the same time span, he obviously got better at it. We're getting slightly better at reading it. I think
I'll
he
need to
probably
check,
got
but
better at writing it.
I think this was several years to write. So yeah, I suspect he probably was getting better. His thought was becoming more clear as he went. So all right.
Yeah, I'm now the new main goal for this book club is to finish this in less time than he took to write. Because that'd be really embarrassing otherwise, I gotta say.
Agreed.
Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen now, and we can move on to point 6 and hopefully try to get to half the midpoint. We're halfway through to the halfway. We're
I'm glad we
so,
set our bar low here because we always go so slow. And a reminder to you and to our audience that we're going to try and because these will just go on forever if we just let ourselves keep talking. I think I'm gonna enforce a hard cutoff at 90 minutes here for this. So if we
that's
haven't gotten
fine.
where we want to get to,
We'll stop.
I will literally just end the recording mid sentence if need be. So
Yeah, we'll stop and we'll make a note of where we are and we can continue. It's not a big problem.
sure.
Because we'll reread the section. We'll get faster as it goes. We'll get faster, better, stronger. All that sweet jazz. All right, point 6, which is the end of the first section, which is when he's going to really talk about mystical theology. We have said that above metaphysical wisdom, there is theological wisdom. Above it, there is infused wisdom, which is also called mystical theology, and which consists in knowing the essentially supernatural object of faith and theology, deity as such, according to a mode that is suprahuman and supernatural. In this case, according to the profound words of Denise, it is no longer a question of merely learning, but rather of suffering divine things. It is a matter of knowing God by experience in the silence of every creature and of any representation, in accordance with a manner of knowing, itself proportioned to the object known, insofar as that is possible here below. Faith all by itself does not suffice for that. It must be rendered perfect in its mode of operating by the gifts of the Holy Spirit, by the gift of understanding, and above all by the gift of wisdom. That is mystical experience. It belongs to the supernatural order. And now we must examine its conditions. I feel like quote mining Mahaton and just putting faith ... does not suffice as a quote on like Twitter. Just skip the all by itself.
Yep.
Just to and tag all the. I don't even know what denomination is sola fide and what is not because I don't live near Protestants, but just tag any American Christian mutual that is not that isn't a Catholic.
There we go. And it's an I know you're joking, but it is a good point here. Is that
Mm-hmm.
that
No,
mystical
it is. It is.
experience, and he will get into this a lot more in the third section, I think, is of this chapter, which we'll cover next time. But so again, we had rational knowledge, which wasn't even sufficient to know God as He is. We have faith, which can know God as He is, but again in this obscured way. Um, and then we're going to have at the high. Then we have beyond that, we have this mystical experience that he talked about in the first section of this chapter. Is this knowing God, or this experience of God? And as he says, is that faith can't do that. Is that has to be given to us. That is a gift of the Holy Spirit. So faith alone is not sufficient for these mystical experiences, because it has to be something that God gives to you. It has you have to be the mystical experience has to happen to you. It
Mm-hmm.
isn't something that you achieve on your own.
He makes faith not a precondition for grace, but a precondition for wisdom in receiving grace. So
Yes.
a sinner can receive grace and convert, but unless in that moment of receiving grace he also becomes faithful immediately, he will, which is possible and probably has happened in the history of Christianity. He
You
will not
mentioned
achieve.
Paul earlier.
Yeah, he will not achieve mystical wisdom unless he might get to that later, and we hope he will. As Maritain will say, that is the natural end of all life, of all rational life, of all human life, because it is the end of all Christian life. And he has a great quote where he says, all living beings belong to Christ, and that includes all humans. So it is the natural end of life on earth is mystical wisdom, is mystical theology. So, point 7, or
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Section 2, sanctifying grace. Point 7, I'm going to skip around a bit. So I'm going to read half of the first paragraph, and then I'm going to skip to the second and the first half of point 8, pretty much. If we would determine in a suitable way the position of mystical experience and philosophy with respect to each other, and in particular inquire whether or not a mystical experience of a natural order is possible, I would say no, but I haven't read that far into the chapter. We should begin by examining the mystical experience of a supernatural order itself, which is vouched for by all the saints and whose reality as well as its authenticity is certain. We should then carry on our study in a way that is not empirical and external, but scientific, by determining its causes, its raison d'etre. I'm then going to skip to the second paragraph, although I have to wonder, he probably wrote this in French, so I don't know why raison d'etre is in French, unless he really wrote it in French, or he may have written it in English when he. I don't know how the translation.
So I think the translation we have, because I think we're reading the same translation, was one that is his translation. I think it was helpful with it, but this is a Maritain translation of his original French work.
Oh, okay. That sounds awful to do. This is not a short essay, but kudos to him. That makes sense. So, because I was going to say, so far, the translator has done a really good job, man. Really impressive, genuinely, like capturing the prose, because it can't be easy from the original French to the English.
And again, I'll double check this next one. I'm confident he is the translator in this case, like not working alone, but I think he is.
I do remember part of the introduction, the preface, mentioning that he was involved.
Right.
Even if he wasn't the main translator, he definitely checked it over. So, second paragraph, he's going to explain the conditions and the operation of the sanctifying grace, or the grace that gives way to mystical wisdom. First, the primary conditions for this experience in the ontological order. These are the conditions. That is to say, sanctifying grace and the indwelling of a divine persons within the soul in the state of grace. So he's going to explore these two conditions, sanctifying grace and the indwelling of God. Then, in the order of exercise or operation, the manner in which this experience takes place and the means that it brings into play. That is to say, Maritain is going to examine the gifts of the Holy Spirit and the knowledge by connaturality, due to charity. So these are our itinerary for the rest of this half of the chapter. Point 8. The whole theology of sanctifying grace is founded on the words of St. Peter. Grace makes us sharers in the divine nature. Consort divine nature, which literally means sharers of a divine nature, because that's what consort means in... I'm saying it like it's French. It's fucking Latin. Why am I saying it like that? I pronounce it... Whatever. I can't. I always think it's French when I see that word.
Try your Latin accent.
Consort. Yeah, that's my Latin. I can't do it because I'm speaking English. If I was speaking Portuguese, I could do like Latin like properly, but I can't. I'm speaking English. I'm in English mode in my head. So grace makes us sharers in the divine nature. That's the main thing we need to get out of this one sentence here. How can we thus be made gods? Lowercase is the proper word. Lowercase g gods, by the way, not by participation. Receive a communication of what properly belongs to uppercase G God alone. How can a finite subject formally participate in the nature of the infinite? Thomists give this answer. The soul is thus rendered infinite in the order of its relation to the object, a formal participation in deity, which would be impossible were it a question of having deity for its essence. So you cannot be God in your essence, but you can formally participate in him. For it is a pure absurdity that that which is not God should receive as its essence the very essence of God. Manhattan is using essentially purple prose to describe the axiom of not, what is it? The axiom A is A. He's doing the Randian thing of A is A is not B.
Right.
He's literally doing this. God, what is God is God. What is not God is not God. It was like, whoa, yay, deep is. Yeah, a formal participation in deity, which would be impossible were it a question of having deity for its essence, is possible if it is a matter of having deity as object. So we're not participating in God as essence, but we're participating in God as seeing it in object. For a being which is not God to be raised up in its very basic structure and in the energies from which its operations proceed, so as to have as the object of its understanding and love God himself as he sees and loves himself, that is indeed impossible to the forces of nature alone. Yet, no absolute impossibility can be detected in it, by which he means no logical impossibility. It's just not, you don't see it in nature.
It's not naturally possible.
Yes. Grace bestows upon us in a supernatural manner a radical power of grasping pure act as our object. A new route to spiritual operation whose proper and specifying object is the divine essence itself. By an intuitive vision of a divine essence, the beatified creature will receive, with no shadow of pantheism, infinitely more than the most daring pantheism can dream of. The infinitely transcendent God himself, not that wretched idle God mingled with the being of things and emerging through our efforts, which pantheism and the philosophy of becoming imagine, but the true God, who is eternally self-sufficient and eternally blessed in the Trinity of persons. By vision, the creature becomes the true God himself, not in the order of substance, but in the order of that immaterial union which constitutes the intellectual act. If I can, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I am misunderstanding my item, but I'm going to sum up point 8 before I move on to point 9. It is the participation of God insofar as your intellectual act participates of God, or rather, in the proper order of things, God participates in your intellectual act in the sense that he's the one giving you the nudge, not the other way around.
Right. So
how do you understand? Because this is a lot of technical terminology so far.
And I'm going to try and put it simply, but I'm going to harken back to something that we covered chapters ago when we were talking about knowledge. And there was some discussion. There's a couple of definitions of how we define knowledge. And this is actually another point where I take issue, because one of the definitions you'll see is true justified belief. And I think that kind of fails here, because I think the maritime perspective and the one that's sort of more apt here for knowledge is this unity of knower and known, which again is circular or is reductive. It's hard to parse, but when you know something, you attain it in a way. So if I
the intellect takes the form of the object virtually.
Exactly.
But that doesn't help because that's technical terminology. So yeah.
So, but
go on with your explanation.
If I have a glass of ice water in front of me, and I pick up that glass, right, and I become aware that the glass is cold, right? Mm-hmm. Intellectually, I become coldness, or the coldness of the glass. I gain the form of coldness, not
in your intellect.
Yes, not materially, right?
Yes.
Again, my hand gets cold, whatever, but I don't become that coldness. But my intellect gains the coldness, right? I know what it means to be cold. My reason, my knowledge, and the coldness of the glass are unified, right? I take on coldness in an immaterial way.
Yeah,
right?
To grasp an object intellectually is to achieve union with it. It is the same intellectually, not substantially.
Yes. Or if I look at you and I see you, I take on your form, right? Intellectually, I gain your form. I don't start to look like you, but my intellect gains your form. In a sense, it becomes your form in a way.
It's what you
Uh,
see in your mind's eye. That's a somewhat apt metaphor
s-
here.
of- of-
What you
of-
contemplate in what the intellect grasps is what you're seeing in your mind's eye, and what your mind eye sees is you're uniting your mind to it, or the contemplative part of your mind at least to it.
yeah. I could nitpick and be very pedantic about that connection,
Yeah.
but it's the right idea. Um, so what happens in sanctifying grace, or with what happens here is, okay. So how do we be? Because again, the sanctifying grace is sharing the divine nature, right? We become like God. But how do we become like God? Well, we become like God in knowing God, right? We gain God in this exact in an analogous way to how I gain coldness or your face, right? I know God. So to say that my relation to God is as object is, it is God as known, right? So in knowing God and in knowing Him as He is and in knowing His essence, I take Him on in my intellect, right? My mind gains God in an analogous way to how my mind gains the form of a thing that is seen or touched. So it is. So there's a very real way, and again, this relates to the idea of this beatific vision. Is we are becoming like God. How? Well, by knowing Him, by experiencing Him completely and totally. Right? We are gaining in our um, experience or in our knowledge what He is. And so that's what's happening here. Is the way we gain the divine nature is not by becoming like God. It is by knowing God,
Mm-hmm.
and then our intellect gains God in this analogous way, right? It gains God as thing known. God becomes known to us, which again, if we understand knowledge in this way that we described just now, knowing it is taking it on as we become it in this immaterial way.
Mm-hmm. And to fully, I mean, we still have like half the book left, but to fully explicate how God can do that without I don't know if overwhelming would be the right term for our intellect, or the operation of how God does that requires a lot of exposition. I suspect Mahiton
Right.
will tackle it, but it's the quickest metaphor for it in the sense is the non-competitiveness of God,
Mhm.
much like the burning bush. He does not the fire does not consume the bush, which is
Right.
why it was a miracle. Bushes burn all the time. It's a damn desert. Have you ever been there? But they don't. They usually burn up. They don't just burn
Yeah.
and then
And
talk to you.
and the
But
the
what?
two other points here is, one, again, like the only way we ever completely gain that knowledge of God is in the beatific vision, right? You don't do it while you're alive. Even mystical experience is limited from being a complete
Mhm,
knowing of God, because that's reserved for the saints in heaven, right?
mhm,
No man can see me and live, right? We can't gain that in this life. Um, but he also says that, even this more limited version of that becoming as God as object, uh we don't do, right? Naturally, that cannot happen. And he will, again, this will be one of his the objections, or the discussions he raises in the next section, is, can this happen naturally? And he emphatically answers no. This is a supernatural act. This is something that God does to you. Grace is done to you supernaturally. This is
mhm.
not something that it is impossible naturally, right? It is impossible to the forces of nature alone, yet no absolute impossibility can be detected in it, right? God can still do this. There is nothing logically impossible about it. It just can't be naturally achieved.
Yes, by what we know of the natural world, it cannot happen, which is why he actually leaves open the question to then, I assume, debunk it. You've read it further into a chapter than I.
Yes.
The idea of a mystical naturalism, in a way,
Yeah.
if I can put it that way. Because it
And,
is, you need to kind of make the argument that it can't be known, because from an examination of a natural world,
mhm,
you need to make the argument for it.
yep. Which he will do that, and that'll be a part
Mhm.
of section 3.
All right, so point 9. Let's get as far as we can in these 15 minutes we have left.
Right.
So I'm going to skip around a bit in the first paragraph. I'm going to read the first and last half, basically. That is how grace, while leaving us infinitely, uh, I'll repeat this. That is how grace, while leaving us infinitely distant from pure act in the order of being, that is, we're not substantially united to it, is still in the order of spiritual operation in relation to object, a formal participation in divine nature. Then I'll read the next sentence and then skip. A seed of God. And then he says that in Latin, which I will not repeat in words. You can imagine what seed is in Latin. Skipping a bit, if we had a sufficiently elevated notion of grace, many a slip in the direction of naturalism would be rendered impossible. Some, like Leibniz, more or less confuse the kingdom of grace with the realm of spirits, and that is a capital error. And now Mahiton is going to explain how and why it is an error. There is a spiritual metaphysical order beyond sensible nature, wherein dwells not only the metaphysician, but the poet as well, and is above all the mechanism and all the laws of the world of bodies. To this order belongs what is in the most hidden recesses of personality, namely moral and free activity, and, more generally, voluntary activity, inasmuch as a spirit thereby envelops itself. As such, a spirit is no part of the universe, and that is why the angels do not naturally know the secrets of the heart. I'm not going to even touch that footnote. It emerges above the whole created universe, both sensible and suprasensible, taken precisely as an artefactum, that is, as a work of art. But this world of spirits and liberty, far from enclosing within itself any formal participation in deity, is of itself the very peak of nature, understood in the quite general sense of that which has its own proper consistence insofar as it is other than God. Yet it remains itself a merely natural world as long as it is not elevated gratuitously. What he's basically saying is that the order of voluntary activity, of personality and moral force, is still part of the created order, even if it's not part of the physical order as understood by modern science. That it is not part of the movement of bodies, but it is the realm of angels. But yet the angels are created. It is not still reaching mystical wisdom in the sense that mystical wisdom attains the Godhead.
Yes, grace is beyond the order of spirits
Yes.
and of angels. Yes.
There is still an infinite distance between that order and the order of grace, which is not only above sensible nature, like the order he's talking about, but above all created and creatable nature, and any merely natural exercise of liberty. Charity is infinitely higher in relation to the highest created spirit than the latter is in relation to the body. I do have a question. Does he mean charity in itself, such as God's charity, or does he mean the voluntary activity of charity?
He means charity as the love of God.
Okay, yeah, that was a question I had, even in my reread, because I was a little confused in that. Thank you. An act of faith or of love of a little child goes infinitely farther and is something incomparably more precious, more full of vigor, and more effective than the most brilliant natural act of the highest of the angels. Pascal's famous phrase about the free orders expresses an elementary truth of Christianity. And then do you have any comment? Because I'm going to skip a bit to the end of point 9.
Go ahead and skip.
Okay. In supernatural operations, two activities are joined, but not juxtaposed. They're not oppositional. The activity of nature does not initiate what grace completes. From the beginning, nature acts as elevated by grace. If the role of nature and grace in supernatural operation, in the vision of God in heaven, in the act of theological virtues here below were divided, then there would be mechanical addition. No! Precisely because our very essence and our natural powers of action are themselves docility and potentiality with regards to God, our supernatural acts emanate verily from our very depths, from the very roots of our soul and of our faculties, but they so emanate only inasmuch as the soul and its faculties are lifted up by grace and its energies, inasmuch as they are borne by these infused qualities to possibilities absolutely inaccessible to their nature alone. I know he just said that what is it? That grace does not complete what nature initiates. But when I made a note of this segment, I literally wrote grace completing nature. Because I never because when I understood the phrase grace completes nature, I never understood it in an oppositional way or a way of mechanical addition, but fair enough. He is correct in insisting on that terminology.
Should we go on to 10? See if we can get through, maybe at least get
One or two
to
more
Gifts of the
pages.
Holy Spirits. Yep.
Yeah, we can get to gifts of the Holy Spirit. Yeah, that's a good stopping point, actually.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, because it's 10 minutes left, so it's not. We can recap so far and make comments in the last
Sure.
2 minutes or something. So,
Perfect.
the indwelling of a divine person's in the soul. Point 10. He's going here to explain. This is a new mode of God's presence in us through grace, different from how God is already present in us by being first cause. By God qua first cause is always present in everything, but God qua Father is not necessarily, is a new mode of participation in God. So point 10, the effect of our being elevated to the state of grace is a new mode of God's presence within us, one that theologians call the mission of a divine persons and the indwelling of the Trinity in the soul. God is present in us at the most intimate core of our being, as he is present at the most intimate core of all things, by his immensity. I just imagine a really big Jesus when he says it, so it's an unfortunate choice of words. So God is present in the most intimate core of all things by his immensity, or in virtue of his infinite efficiency, because he gives us at each instant our being and our action. But here we are concerned of something quite other than this common presence by immensity. It is a question of a special presence peculiar to souls in the state of grace. This special presence undoubtedly presupposes the presence by immensity and would not be possible without it. But of itself and in virtue of its own proper energies, it is a real and physical, ontological presence of God in the very depths of our being. How? In what respect? As object. Not now as an efficient principle whose primary causality gives being to everything in the soul, but as term towards which the soul is inwardly turned back, converted, and ordered to as an object of loving knowledge. Let us add immediately, for this is the heart of the whole question, that this is not just any knowledge and love. No, but a fruitful experimental knowledge and love which puts us in possession of God and unites us to him not at a distance, but really and truly. For if the divine persons give themselves to us, it is in order that we may possess them, that they may be ours. The gift of God is such that, according to St. Thomas's expression, it enables us freely to enjoy the divine persons. Would that be possible if they were not really and ontologically present there, offering themselves to us in our very depths? Doubtless, it is only in the future life and by vision that man will enjoy this perfect possession. But God does not give himself to us even now as an object of fruition, in order that this gift should remain, in the present, just a dead letter and be wholly reserved for the future life. Carissimi, nunc filii Dei sumus, says St. John, translating, dearly beloved, now we are nunc filii Dei sumus, we are sons of God. So, dear or beloved, we are truly sons of God, says St. John. From this present moment, we are sons of God. Know you not that your members are the temple of the Holy Ghost, who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? Corinthians. Eternal life begins here now. It begins here below and should grow unceasingly till the dissolution of the body, in such a way as to realize by mystical experience and infuse contemplation themselves, as far as possible on this earth, in the night of faith, in which what we shall be has not yet appeared. That possession of God to which sanctifying grace is essentially ordained. Thus, it is clear that mystical experience and infused contemplation are, indeed, seen to be the normal, rightful end of the life of grace. They could even be said to be the summit towards which all human life tends. For, in this fallen and redeemed world, wherein grace presses in on every side, human life tends towards the Christian life, since every man belongs by right to Christ, the head of the human race, and Christian life itself, as we have just said, tends to the mystical life. That's a good place to stop the reading. And does he? Yeah, we can maybe try to sum up the new mode of. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to sum up this last point that is not just reading him again.
Yeah, and I'll try and be succinct. So again, that there's and he used the use of the word immanence, like you were pointing out, sort of puts weird things in our heads, and
Mm-hmm.
talking about God's immensity. But God is present in all created things, imminently, right?
Yes.
By actively participating in willing their existence.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
the Aristotelian argument for the existence of God. It's every movement, every thought, every action of your being first originates in God because you're not the reason for your own existence. And this isn't a cosmological argument. This is about here and now in
yeah,
this moment of time.
yeah. As Merton says, He gives us at each instant our being and our action, and
Yes.
that is true of all of creation. Um, when we talk about this indwelling of the divine persons, we are talking about a very different way in which God exists within you, and it's the same way we were just talking about, is as object, as thing known and loved, right? Because to know God is to properly know God is to love Him. Um, but yes, is so this very different mode in which God is present in us, and it's not just imminently, but it is as known and as loved by us. And again, this is only
Mm-hmm.
possible through grace, because this is a uh, as he says, there is a real connection there, right? There is no distance. We're not united to him at a distance, but really, like, he is really present in
Mm-hmm.
when we receive sanctifying grace. The divine persons are really present within us, directly. Um, and again, it is the a perfect possession of this knowledge and love of God is reserved for the beatific vision, is reserved for heaven, what he calls here the future life. But that doesn't mean we can't have some participation in it now, right? Is even in this life we are
Mm-hmm.
temples of the Holy Ghost, because we should seek this indwelling of the divine persons within us. And it is this the and again, that is the nature or the essence of mystical experience, is this direct connection with the divine persons, and likewise contemplation. And as he says, that is the end of the life of grace, right? It is that knowing of God, that direct encounter, and that experimental knowledge of God is the end of grace, and as such, as he said, is what all human life tends
Mm-hmm.
towards.
Yeah, it is the end of grace and the beginning of eternal life. It is which should grow unceasingly until the dissolution of our bodies.
Yes, at which point, assuming we receive the beatific vision, we will then have that knowledge perfectly. And it's not meant to say that we don't. It is not for us, here before, um, but that it should grow towards that moment when we get to experience it perfectly and completely. All right, so we made it through
Yep.
10ish pages.
I
12.
think it was more closer. Yeah, 12. Let's be kind to ourselves.
We were targeting 20. So yeah. Anyways, so yeah, next time we'll definitely get through the rest of section 2. We'll try and get to the couple of objections that he raises. I thought it was very interesting, and I'm curious what you'll think of this. He really sort of switches to this Aristotelian mode of argumentation, where he will go and he will raise objections and try and make them very succinctly and clearly, and then he will try and refute them. Like he does his own sort of mini summa here and tackling these
Oh,
objections.
he's gonna do the objections, but I say, however, I say,
Exactly. Yeah.
and responsio to the objections. Yeah, yeah, he's
Uh,
gonna do the set contra
yeah.
to the
Exactly.
contrary.
Exactly.
I was like, yeah, I was trying to remember the terminology. It's been a while since I've been on New Advent to read St. Thomas responding to an objection.
All right. But so yeah, this was we'll call it part A of chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we can very quickly get through part B and a part C, and then that will conclude chapter 6, and then we'll be on our way. Um, yeah, I'm hoping we get into a good rhythm here. As always, love getting to do these. I've been wanting to, as I've said several times now, I've been wanting to read this book for a long time, and just needed someone to push me through it. So whether I hope people listening are enjoying this and getting something out of it. I know I'm getting a lot out of it, and
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate the chance to read it and discuss it.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I definitely needed something to push me to read it. I've enjoyed reading. I guess I even say lighter? Very lighter compared to this. I've enjoyed reading Maiton's lighter works, such as Free Reformers and a few of his essays that I've found scattered in my in the library of my university. But this is certainly a big commitment and a big undertaking, because it's a very much more rigorous in a way. I don't know if he's always rigorous, but it's certainly more academic than
Yes.
his other work, because he's not really concerned with, like, discussing Husserl and Heidegger. He doesn't discuss Heidegger, so I shouldn't say that. But he's not concerned with, like, talking about the status of phenomenology as a proper mode of philosophy, or as a proper epistemology in, like, Free Reformers or whatever.
Right.
Or when I read an essay of his on the liturgy. He doesn't give a shit about phenomenology and, like, Husserl or whatever there. He's just talking about the life of the liturgy. It's something like short and sweet. This is certainly more academic and aimed at other academic, principally Thomists in a way. I think he's somewhat trying to bring around other Thomists and other Catholics to his way of viewing things, to provide a resource for it's essentially a summa in some ways. He's trying to sum up a lot of other Thomist thought, especially referring to St. Thomas, interpreters such as John of St. Thomas, Cajetan, referring to Father Gulagrange. He cites him a lot earlier, and try to essentially provide both a summa and a reply to other Catholic philosophers. Especially in the first part, he has some disagreements with a few guys on very specific points. But yeah,
I,
it's a
I will
very
say again though,
big
this
undertaking.
has been a lot easier. It's gotten easier to read. Chapter 6 is the easiest has been to press forward. I've definitely gotten
Yes.
stuck a lot more in previous chapters.
Oh,
This one I've
yes.
had to go slowly, but I've been able to. It has flowed much more easily, and I
Yeah, I've
think it's
only
just because
had
the
time
material's
to.
gotten much more engaging in my mind
Yeah,
at least.
I've only had to read it, like, I've only had, like, today and a bit of yesterday evening to read it. And this is, I think, the easiest time I've had of it. And it's partly because the material is more engaging, but it's also because I think it's more intuitively understandable to Catholics in terms of, you don't need to know who Husserl is to read this. You don't
Right.
even truly need to know, who Cajetan is or John of St. Thomas is. I've read a few excerpts from Cajetan. I've never read John of St. Thomas. So you don't really need to know who these guys are. You can just kind of comprehend it. And if you're going to church and you pray, and you've had at least one experience that you believe to have been moved by grace, you know what and you've read some Aristotle, you know what he's talking about. Especially with the previous chapters, with the background work of the previous chapters as a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
He picks up a lot of speed where he's not slow, because this is super rational knowledge. He's not slowed down by, I suppose, objections to it, in trying to very carefully set down the rational epistemology of metaphysics proper. or natural theology, or
Right.
even philosophy of science, so natural philosophy.
All right. Well, we're gonna stick to our rigid time constraints.
Yes, very much so.
And hopefully we'll be back here in a few short weeks, continuing on with chapter 6 of Jacques Maritain's The Degrees of Knowledge. Take care, everyone, and see you again soon.
Bye.